Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Good evening and welcome to the Reaver of Common Sense, making sense out of the senseless right here on SHR Media, conservative media done right. Tonight's show is one of those nights where the headlines alone show you how upside down the political world has become. In the last 24 hours, we've seen U.S. military power make history in the Persian Gulf. A congressional race implodes under scandal. And Washington once again proved that the swamp protects its own when the spotlight gets too close. We'll start with newly released footage of a U.S. Navy torpedo strike that sank an Iranian vessel, the first confirmed combat torpedo launch by the United States since World War II. Then we turn back home where Congressman Tony Gonzalez abruptly withdrew from his runoff race, handing a win to Brandon Herrera, while Washington debates the National Constitutional Carry Act and the House votes 357 to 65 to keep misconduct records hidden from the public. We'll also cover Jasmine Crockett political fallout, Rashida Tlaib's controversial comments, Trump's approval numbers compared to Obama and Bush, a massive media merger reshaping CNN and CBS, the HHS warning on parental rights, a DHS leadership shakeup, Space Force's role in the Iranian strike, the Massie war powers controversy, and New York's expanding taxpayer-funded child care benefits. In other words, foreign policy, media power, Washington politics all collide in one night. So buckle up, because tonight we're connecting the dots between foreign policy, the Washington power structure, media influence, and the policies hitting Americans directly in their wallet. If you want to support the show directly, you can become a YouTube member by hitting the join button below the stream or drop a super chat during the live broadcast. Your support helps keep the lights on at SHR Media and keep this microphone live. And don't forget to check out SHR Media merch store at shrmedia.com, because sometimes the best way to spread common sense is to wear it. And as always, if you want a full breakdown, the articles, the stories, the corporate media conveniently ignores, head on over to shrmedia.com, where independent journalism is still alive and well. All right, let's get into it. All right. That was a mouthful. You can get one of these coffee mugs in our merch store. Well, if you thought the political swamp in D.C. was the only thing taken on water this week, wait until you see what happened in the Middle East. For years, the experts and the talking heads on the left have told us that peace through strength approach was nothing but a receipt for disaster. But today, the narrative didn't just stumble, it hit a brick wall. The War Department has officially released the footage of a U.S. force engaging and sinking Iranian naval vessels. Now we know the Iranian regime didn't expect this. They've been playing this cat and mouse game in the shipping lanes for months, thinking they could harass the world's economy without consequences. But once the orders were signed and the torpedo was in the water, the truth started leaking out, literally. This is a U.S. Navy submarine. That is a Iranian ship. Fast track to the bottom of the Gulf. Bye-bye ship. Oh, that is beautiful. I could watch that over and over again. Hold on one second. Oh. Gonna correct some settings here. So, according to the official report, this is the first time since World War II that a U.S. vessel had launched a torpedo in a combat engagement. Think about the common sense here. If there was even a shred of doubt about that the U.S. Navy was prepared to defend the Straits of Hormuz, do you really think the Iranian fleet would be scrambling for a ceasefire today? Of course not. But when you're staring down the business end of a Mark 48 and the consequences are real, the regional fairy tales have to stop. For years, we heard the diplomats at the State Department try to create a de-escalation strategy that involved nothing but empty threats and late-night apologies. But we have the actual footage, the actual impact, effectively shutting down the very idea that weakness is a deterrent. It turns out when the chips are down and the Navy is in the room, even the most radical regimes have to admit that they've known all along. The media favorite narrative about inevitable escalation was a total fabrication. Now we have Iran trying to get a ceasefire, and they have been told by Trump there's only one way, and that is a 100% surrender. 100% surrender will get you the bombings to stop, the attacks to stop. But that also means the regime will be no more. And while that moment is unfolding on the global stage, the political drama back here at home, well, it's just as explosive. Because one congressional race in Texas just blew up the Washington protection racket. For months, the narrative from the Tony Gonzalez camp was that the reports of an affair were nothing but a coordinated smear campaign by his opponent, Brandon Herrera. But today, that narrative didn't just stumble. Yeah, something else hit a brick wall. Late Thursday night, March 5th, Congressman Tony Gonzalez finally posted his official withdrawal from the Texas 23rd runoff. Now, we know he didn't go willingly. He fought these allegations for months until he was staring down a formal House Ethics Committee investigation. But once the primary was over and the pressure from Speaker Mike Johnson became real, the truth started leaking out. According to the report, Gonzalez admitted to the affair on a Joe Page show just one day after he failed to win his primary outright. Think about the common sense here. If there was even a shred of integrity left, do you really think he would have waited until 10 p.m. on a Thursday night to focus on his family? Of course not. But when the ethics committee has the receipts and your own leadership tells you the gig is up, the political fairy tale has to stop. What makes this even more telling is how quickly the political machinery around Washington went quiet once the withdrawal was announced. The same outlets that spent weeks dismissing the allegations as partisan attacks suddenly stopped talking about the race altogether. That silence tells you everything you need to know about how the establishment media operates when one of its preferred incumbents becomes politically radioactive. Voters in Texas' 23rd district weren't buying the spin anymore either. This is a district that has seen plenty of political maneuvering over the years, but when constituents started feeling like they're being lied to directly, patience runs out quickly. Herrera's campaign tapped directly into that frustration, presenting himself as the outsider willing to challenge a system many voters already believed was stacked against them. For years, the experts at the NRCC and the mainstream media tried to create a protective bubble around this seat, trying to convince the voters that an outsider like the AK guy, Brandon Herrera, for those that don't know, couldn't handle the job. But here we have the sitting incumbent effectively resigning in lieu of termination, shutting down the very lies he's been feeding his district for an entire election cycle. It turns out that when the chips are down and the lawyers are in the room, even the most protected swamp creatures have to admit what we've known all along. The establishment's favorite incumbent was a total fabrication. Now, for those that don't know, here is a man that married with kids, had an affair, I think, with one of his staff. I was going to say, I think his secretary, but it's one of his staff. And he used his position in that relationship. She was married also. She ended up committing suicide because of the affair. This man couldn't own up to it. He was more worried about his political career than anything else. He used his power to get this woman into bed. That is sick and disgusting. And now the facts are coming out. And he was either going to get kicked out of Congress or he had to resign. Now, he did the best thing he could to try to salvage anything of a possible career was by resigning. Brandon Herrera, I don't know him personally, but from what I've seen of him, heard of him, he is going to make a much better representative for Texas than this guy. This guy was I know everybody likes to use the term rhino. I like a UDI, undocumented Democrat insurgent. And we have a lot of them in the party. And he was one of them. He voted for, kept open borders, voted against gun rights, time and time again. The only time he spoke positively about shutting the border down or positively about the Second Amendment was when it was election time, when it was time to kiss the constituents' ass. Then he would speak highly. But when it actually came time for pen to paper, he never showed up. He never voted for the people. I want to thank everybody in the chat room. I appreciate everybody that's there, even the ones that don't like me and the ones that like me. I appreciate you all being here. All I ask is be calm, don't be rude, and respect the moderators. And thank you, moderators, for being here tonight. And that collapse of a political narrative brings us to another story out of Washington. One where the push for optics and political messaging may have put innocent people at risk. In Washington, everything is a stage. Every guest sitting in that gallery during the State of the Union is a prop, carefully chosen by politicians to tell a specific story. But what happened when the poster child for a movement turns out to be a nightmare for American families? We are now seeing the report that a guest invited by congressional Democrats to attend the State of the Union, intended to be a symbol of hope and inclusion, has been linked to multiple sexual assault reports. And it gets worse. Police say these reports involve juveniles. This individual was championed as a success story. Yet he is now at the center of a horrific investigation involving the most vulnerable members of our community. Common sense tells you that if you're going to fly someone to the nation's capital and put them in a seat of honor, you might want to do a basic background check, but in a rush to score political points, humanize the border crisis, it seems the vetting process was nothing more than a rubber stamp. While the politicians were busy patting themselves on the back for their compassion, a predator was being given a front row seat to the very government he was subverting. This isn't just a failure of policy. It's a betrayal of trust. The same people who scream about safety and protecting the children when it suits their agenda were the ones who literally opened the door for this individual. When you prioritize optics over security, this is the result. It's a slap in the face to every legal immigrant who followed the rules and every American parent who expects the government to put their child's safety first. And when political theater starts putting people at risk, it raises a bigger question about the priorities coming out of Washington. Because while some politicians are busy staging optics, the courts are busy deciding what your constitutional rights actually mean. For years, the District of Columbia has been a laboratory for every unconstitutional gun control experiment the far left could dream up. But yesterday, the D.C. Court of Appeals, the city's highest court, finally looked at the city's 10-round magazine ban and said, enough. In a landmark 2-1 ruling, the court didn't just strike down the law. They called out the intellectual dishonesty of the large capacity label. The judge wrote that these magazines are not exotic or dangerous or unusual. No, he used the words, I ain't going to try that one. He used a $5 word, obliquous. He pointed out, I know the haters in the chat are going to have fun with that. Have fun with it. He pointed out that they account for about half of all magazines in the hands of the American people and come standard with the most popular firearms sold today. Common sense will tell you that if half the country own it, it's in common use. And if it's in common use, the government has zero business banning it. The court even reversed the conviction of Tyree Benson, the man at the center of the case, because his crime was possessing an arm that the Second Amendment explicitly protects. But here's the kicker. The U.S. Attorney's Office, now under the Trump administration, actually conceded that the ban was unconstitutional. They stopped defending it. It was only the D.C. local government that tried to keep the charade going. This ruling is a massive signal to states like Virginia and New York that are trying to push similar bans. Your 10-round limit isn't a safety measure. It's a legal fiction, and the courts are finally calling your bluff. And if the courts are finally starting to recognize what the Second Amendment actually says, the fight in Washington is about to take that principle nationwide. There is a fundamental difference between a right and a privilege. A privilege is something that the government allows you to have if you fill out the right forms and pay the right fees. A right is something you were born with. And Senator Mike Lee just reminded Washington of that distinction by introducing the National Constitutional Carry Act yesterday. Common sense tells you that the Second Amendment doesn't have a border clause. But right now we live in a country where a law-abiding citizen can be a hero in one state and a felon in the next just for crossing a line on the map. Senator Mike Lee is looking to end that permission slip culture. His bill would establish nationwide permitless carry, ensuring that your right to self-defense doesn't expire the moment you enter a state with hostile local officials. What this really highlights is how fragmented gun laws have become across the country. A right that is clearly written into the Constitution ends up being treated like a patchwork of local permissions depending on which highway exit you take. For millions of Americans who travel for work, family, or simple everyday life, the legal landscape changes mile by mile. Lee's proposal is aimed directly at that contradiction. Supporters argue that constitutional rights should not be dependent on state borders any more than freedom of speech or freedom of religion would be. If the First Amendment doesn't disappear when you cross into another state, they argue the Second Amendment shouldn't either. The core idea behind the bill is that constitutional protections should travel with the citizen, not stop at the welcome sign. Now, the critics are already screaming Wild West, but let's look at the actual text. This isn't a free-for-all. Private property owners can still say no, and secure government buildings remain off-limit. But most importantly, if you're already legally barred from owning a firearm, this bill doesn't give you a pass. It simply says that for the rest of us, the law-abiding citizens, the Second Amendment is the only permit we should ever need. Another point supporters raise is that many states already operate underneath constitutional carry laws today. Hang on one second. Tired, eyes hurting. Long day. Long day. The National Association for Gun Rights is calling this the only legislation that actually restores the right to carry without begging for government permission. And they're right. We spent decades treating our fundamental rights like a library card that can be revoked by a bureaucracy in a city you're just driving through. It's time we stopped asking for a hall pass to protect our own lives and start treating the Bill of Rights like the law of the land. I know the liberals are freaking out over this, screaming, yelling. It is a right. You don't need a card. You don't need a permit for free speech. You don't need it for freedom of press. You don't need it for freedom of religion. I hear the argument against voter ID because it puts a cost at voting and it's a right. Well, guns are a right too, but yet I got to pay fees. Well, not really in Florida. A lot of states, you got to buy permit fees. It's the same thing. I got to show an ID to buy a gun. So I should have to show an ID to vote. But constitutional debates aren't the only political fight erupting right now. Inside the Democrat Party itself, another political narrative just collided with reality. Jasmine Crockett's primary results in Texas just sent a shockwave through the identity politics machine. For months, the media told us she was the undisputed future of the party, the virtual sensation who could do no wrong. But the voters in her own district just handed her a humiliating loss, and now the knives are out. Black Democrats and veteran party strategists are openly unleashing on her, calling her strategy of doubling down on combative rhetoric a total failure. Tallarico ran on a platform of faith, unity, and the numbers show he doubled her in key demographics because people are tired of the social media influencer approach to governing. Common sense tells you that if being loud on X and making viral clips was enough to win, her own party wouldn't be sprinting away from her this fast. For years, the experts at MSNBC tried to build a career for her. But the actual voters, the people who live there, just shut it down. It turns out that when the ballots are in the box, even the most vocal activists have to admit social media following doesn't equate a mandate. And before we hit the break, just a quick reminder. If you enjoy what you're doing here on SHR Media and Reaver of Common Sense, consider supporting the show. You can join the channel as a YouTube member by hitting that join button below the stream. Members help keep independent media alive and get some extra perks as our community grows. And if you want to jump into the conversation live, super chats are open. Your message gets highlighted on the screen, and it helps keep the show rolling. SHR Media merch is here, and it's built for people who refuse to sit quietly while the nonsense runs wild. From bold logos, tees, to gear that makes a statement without saying a word, this isn't just merch. It's a signal. You stand for free speech. You stand for accountability. You stand where the truth lives. Wear it, share it, live it. Grab your SHR Media merch today and represent common sense wherever you go. Head over to SHR Media and check out the store. And we'll read a few more stories when we come back. Don't go anywhere. More Reaver of Common Sense coming up right after this message.
Listen to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon Radio Show. Live on select and exclusive Tuesday and Thursday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Rumble channel, SHR Media YouTube channel, X, Twitch, Spreaker, and wherever great conservative podcasts are found. BZ, your conservative Sherpa, guides you through the maelstrom of Democrat, leftist, and globalist lies, chaos, deceit, and betrayal. Raised as a free-range child with dirt, stains, mud, and freedom, BZ broadcasts from North Idaho, comfortably surrounded by actual normal people. Jump into our plush, sumptuous, palatial, and resplendent chat room on rumble.com. Click on live chat to join. Now, with 37% more umbrage and 19% more bulbosity than previous shows, featuring delicious Liberty additives for the best in late-night conservatarian talk radio. BZ reminds you that with great beard comes great responsibility. No chinchillas were harmed, embarrassed, fat-shamed, or the focus of any sarcasm whatsoever in the making of this ad.
Are you looking for a way to boldly express your faith and love for your country? And check out Seven Armors, the premier apparel company for patriotic men of God, where faith meets freedom in style. Our t-shirts are more than just clothing, they're statements. Bold, stylish, and meaningful. From timeless messages to modern designs, we've got something for every patriotic man of God. Wear your beliefs proudly with Seven Armors gear. Don't miss the chance to wear your faith and freedom on your sleeve. Visit 7armors.com today and join the movement. That's the number 7armors.com.
Hey, where do you go when you want real conversation and topics? That's right, you step to the edge. The Edge of Liberty is your home for talk radio the way it was meant to be. I'll be live every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Network, and we're simulcast on KLRN Radio. We're building something different, Aaron. We just want you to be a part of it. I'll see you on the edge.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back to the Reaver of Common Sense. I'm your host, Jersey Joe, here to make sense out of the senseless, right here on SHR Media, conservative media done right. And don't forget, if you enjoy what we're doing here on SHR Media and Reaver of Common Sense, don't just hit subscribe, hit that join button. Or you can just do a super chat, and that helps the channel grow. That helps the station grow. It's been a long day. I know I said that. It's been a really long day. But that identity-driven political strategy doesn't stop at campaign messaging. It also shows up in how some elected officials define their own loyalty. Rashida Tlaib is back in the spotlight this week, and once again, she's reminding everyone exactly where her loyalties lie. During a heated exchange with a reporter pressing her on recent comments regarding U.S. foreign policy, Tlaib finally hit the breaking point. When asked if her first priority was the American taxpayer or her ancestral homeland, she didn't just dodge the question. She leaned into it. In the clip that is currently detonating on social media. Hold on 1 second. Let me get this set up. See, this is why we need producers, Sean. We need to find a budget for producers. Yeah. There we go. Let me see. I can't see that right now. We'll get back to it. As I said, this clip is going all over social media. Tlaib snapped back saying, I am Palestinian, not American. In the context of her identity and her legislative focus, this wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a mask-off moment for a sitting member of the United States Congress. Think about that. I am a Palestinian, not American.
You didn't stand when he said, do you support Americans first?
I'm Muslim, you're racist.
Allegedly impeding the Congress is a federal offense.
Yeah.
So we have to investigate it.
So is this an official investigation here that we're doing?
It's what's called a police stop.
Before you go into your office, Congresswoman, it's been a week since the State of the Union. Have you figured out if you're for the American people or for illegal immigrants first?
Okay.
It's a very simple question. You're a representative.
That's a very racist question. I'm an American, so because I'm Palestinian, I'm Muslim, I'm not an American.
Stand up,
You didn't stand when he said, do you support Americans first?
I'm Muslim, you're racist.
Do you support Americans first, or do you want to gaslight us? Because if you want to gaslight us, then that's fine, but just say it out loud. Don't be scared. She's literally screaming racist to me and you. You're Russian. I'm Cuban. We're both Americans. She says I'm Muslim, so where's the racism in that? Last I checked, being Muslim isn't a race.
The officers just approached us and asked us if we just left Rashida Tlaib's office, which we then said no. So it looks like they called in.
Just hang around here to see what happened because we're sure that this is about us. So. Can we ask you, sir, did they complain or something? Is that why cops were called up here?
Yeah, something or somebody was harassing him. I don't know.
Oh, great.
So actually, we were harassed.
She was calling us racist because we asked her if she stood up for the American people. When Trump asked, she didn't stand up.
Are you the guys? Yeah, don't want to question you.
You have a press pass?
Yeah, we're
but
press.
that's not house issued.
No,
We're press. So that's different. Who are you with?
We're with Frontlines.
Okay, do me a favor, just put that down, okay?
So is this an official investigation here that we're doing?
It's what's called a police stop right now.
Okay.
So we can figure out what's going on.
Got it.
Okay.
So
allegedly impeding the Congress is a federal offense.
Yeah.
So we have to investigate this. So just cooperate with us.
Sure.
If you're stopping them from, if they have to divert around you because you are now blocking them.
Oh my God. They impeded her. Common sense tells you that when you take an oath to the Constitution in the United States, you aren't a representative of a foreign entity or a specific ethnic interest over the people who actually pay your salary. For years, the experts at CNN and MSNBC have tried to frame Tlaib's rhetoric as passionate advocacy or diverse perspective. But when you're standing in the halls of the U.S. Capitol and explicitly rejecting your American identity in favor of a foreign one, the political fairy tales have to stop. If any Republican member of Congress stood up and said they were Russian, not American, or Israel, not American, the media would be calling for their immediate expulsion for a breach of the oath of office. But because it's the squad, we're told to understand the nuance. It turns out when the chips are down and the cameras are rolling, even Tlaib has to admit what we've known all along. Her favorite narrative isn't about serving Michigan. It's about using an American seat to push foreign agenda. And if you want to understand why trust in Washington keeps collapsing, the next story explains it perfectly, because Congress just voted to keep its own conduct records hidden from the public. Give me 1 second to get this all straightened out, please. I just need a moment. I want to thank you for your patience with me. I greatly appreciate it. All right. Just getting some things corrected here real quick. All right. Nothing tonight is random. None of it happened in isolation. While you're out there punching a clock and following the law, the people representing you in Washington just sent a very clear message. The rules are for the governed, not the governors. In a staggering 357 to 65 vote, the House just moved to block the release of internal sexual misconduct reports involving members of Congress. Think about the common sense here for a second. If you or I had misconduct reports filed against us at a regular job, or if a first responder was under investigation, there'd be a paper trail and immediate accountability. But in D.C., they decided the club needs a fortress. They want the power to lecture the American people on morality while using your tax dollars to settle their own legal disasters in the dark. But here's the real kicker, the absolute blinding hypocrisy of it all. These are the exact same people who just spent months to years screaming all across social media about Jeffrey Epstein. They stood on their soapboxes demanding every flight log be made public and insisted that sunlight is the best disinfectant. But when it came to the sins of the elite, they used those headlines to build their brands and stoke your outrage. Yet the second the spotlight turns towards the hallowed halls of Congress, suddenly the right to privacy is the most sacred thing in the world. When it was someone else's list, they wanted blood. When it's their list, they want a shredder. And this isn't some narrow partisan vote where one side is protecting its own. Look at the numbers again. 357 members voted to keep these records sealed. That means Republican and Democrats alike locked arms the second transparency threatened to reach their own offices. The moment accountability pointed inward, party lines suddenly disappeared. That tells you something important about Washington. The fierce fights you see on television often vanish the second the institution itself feels threatened. They will battle over budgets, speeches, headline. But when the reputation of Congress as a whole is on the line, the political class suddenly discovers the meaning of bipartisanship. And remember, taxpayers have already paid millions of dollars over the years and quiet settlements tied to misconduct and their claims involving congressional offices. These payouts don't come from the personal bank accounts of the politicians involved. They come from federal funds. In other words, the public has already paid the bill while being told it doesn't have the right to see the receipts. That is why this vote matters far beyond the scandal of the week. It reinforces the perception that Washington operates under a different rule book than the rest of the country. A rule book where transparency is demanded from everyone else, but avoided at all costs when it threatens the institution itself. It turns out that when the chips are down and their own reputations are on the line, even the most bitter enemies in the House will hold hands to make sure you never see the truth. The swamp isn't just a place. It's a pact to keep the ruling class untouchable. And think about the women in Congress that just voted to protect people who have sexually harassed women. They are protecting the harassers. And yes, the squad definitely voted for protection. But despite all the political maneuvering, the numbers coming out this week show something the establishment didn't expect. Hold on one second. I gotta. Again, sucks not having a producer. Oh.
More than.
All right. Give me one more second. Again, thank you for your patience, and I'm sorry about that. Real Clear Politics just dropped the latest approval numbers for March of 2026, and the data is a massive reality check for the DC establishment. President Trump is currently sitting at a 43.3% approval rating. To understand that, that's a win. You have to look at history. And also, you got to understand there is 2 or 3 other polls there that have him over 50% now. At this exact same point in their second term, Barack Hussein Obama was at 42.5%, and George W. Bush was sitting at 38.7%. Despite every headline and every expert prediction saying this moment was dead, Trump is statistically more popular right now than the last 2 status quo presidents were at the same stage of their presidency.
Republicans love Donald Trump more than any president's own party supporters loved him at this particular point. Just take a look here. Okay, own party supporters, 21st century presidents, own party approval about at this point in the second term. Bush was at 77%. Obama was at 77%. Look at this. 86% of Republicans approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing at this point. That is higher than either Obama or Bush had within their own party at this point. Trump's magic touch has not seemed to wear off yet when it comes to the Republican base.
And what kind of approval are we talking about here?
Okay, so we're talking about overall approval here. How about the strongly approved, not just like, but love. Okay, we're going to look at these same presidents again. Strong approval among your own party's base. What you see here is Trump is the only one who gets a majority at this point in their presidency. Obama was at 48%. Bush was.
I know the heads are exploding in chat. I know they're exploding in chat with this. And this is CNN, people. This is not me. This is not some right-wing site. This is CNN.
At 47%. You see here Trump at 53%, not as high as overall approval rating, but still getting a majority of the Republican base, at least in the average of polls, to say that they still really, really, really like him.
Okay.
Like I said, I know the heads are exploding in the chat room. But common sense tells you that while the talking heads were obsessed with lawfare and the 24-hour outrage cycle, the American people are looking at the reality of their bank accounts and the security of the border. When you stop listening to the polishing on CNN, MSNBC, and look at actual results, it's clear the public knows exactly who is delivering. The unelectable narrative just hit the wall of hard data. What makes these numbers even more interesting is the political environment surrounding them. Trump is operating under a level of scrutiny that few modern presidents have experienced, with investigations, lawsuits, nonstop media coverage dominating the news cycle. Under normal political logic, that kind of pressure should drive approval numbers down dramatically. Instead, the numbers suggest something different is happening. Voters appear to be separating the noise of the political fight from the policies affecting their daily lives. When people look at inflation, border enforcement, and international posture, they are making judgments based on results rather than headlines. Another factor the media rarely acknowledge is how approval ratings behave during periods of intense political polarization. In today's environment, very few voters move between camps, which means even small shifts in approval can signal meaningful change in political sentiment. A point or two of movement now can represent millions of voters. And that is exactly why these numbers matter to the political class. Polling like this undermines the narrative that the movement behind Trump is fading. Instead, it suggests the opposite, that despite constant political combat, the base of support remains durable and in some cases might even be strengthening. And when you look at the polls that are coming out about Congress, they're tied right now. And if you got the inside internal polling, I'd bet dollars to donuts the Republicans are leading. I know you're going to say how there's a blue wave. I know how you're going to say the polls are showing this. You got to understand that there's internal polling, and then there's the polls that they show the American people. And they very often are two very different numbers. So I'm not saying there's a red wave. You can say there's a blue wave all you want. Discourage your base. Go right ahead. I think things are going to stay basically the way they are right now. I don't see major shifts in either directions. But we will find out in November. And when those numbers start contradicting the narrative, next place to look is the media machine shaping that narrative in the first place. If you want to understand why the news looks the same no matter what channel you turn to, you have to look at who's signing the checks. We just got the final word on the media merger of the decade. Paramount Skydance, led by David Ellison's, has officially won the bidding war for Warner Brothers Discovery, a massive $110 billion deal that changes everything you know about Big Five movie studios. But we aren't here to talk about who owns Harry Potter or Batman. We're here to talk about the truth business. That is the exact phrase David Ellison used this week when he was asked about the future of CNN. He said he wants to move away from the hyper-partisan extremes and build a news service that is fundamentally in the truth business. Now, on the surface, that sounds like common sense, right? Who wouldn't want a news organization that actually cares about the truth? But look at the polishing beneath the surface. This merger puts CNN and CBS News under the same corporate roof. One company now controls two of the most influential newsrooms in the world. And while the CEO is talking about center left and center right, his critics are already panicking. Why? Because they've seen what's happening at CBS, where Barry Weiss has been brought in to reshape the programming. Common sense tells you that when you consolidate that much power into one boardroom, the truth becomes whatever is best for the bottom line. It's not just about what they report. It's about what they choose not to report. While the media elites are fighting over whether this merger is too friendly to the White House or too corporate, the real story is that your choices for independent information just got smaller. You want you to believe that trust is something they can buy for $110 billion. But in the real world, trust is earned by being honest. Even when it's inconvenient, you can call it the truth business all you want. But if the same person is writing the scripts for both teams, the game is already rigged. And when media power starts concentrating into fewer hands, it's worth asking how that influences shapes policy debates, especially when those debates reach into your own home. The Department of Health and Human Services just sent a massive shockwave through the state capitals in Sacramento and Springfield. On March 3rd, 2026, the Administration for Children and Families dropped a formal Dear Colleague letter that is a direct hit on states trying to play parent in chief. For years, we've watched states like California and Illinois push policies that essentially treat parents like criminals if they don't immediately affirm a child's self-identification. Well, the feds just reminded them of a little thing called the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. The message was loud and clear. If you want federal grant money, you have to follow federal law. And federal law says children removal requires objective evidence of harm, not just a disagreement over biological reality or religious beliefs. Common sense tells you that a parent's job is to guide their child through the confusion of growing up, not to be sidelined by a government bureaucracy with a political agenda. Assistant Secretary Alex Adams isn't just sending a polite suggestion here. He's holding the purse strings. He made it clear that the states continuing these inappropriate policies are risking their federal funding. This follows right on the heels of the Supreme Court ruling, in which already put the hammer down on school districts trying to keep secrets from parents. We are finally seeing the biological truth directive get some real teeth at the federal level. It turns out that when you stop the polishing from the activist class and look at the law, the state doesn't have the right to replace the family unit. The tide is turning, and it's about time the government stayed out of the living rooms. And while Washington is wrestling with domestic policy fights, the White House is also making major moves inside the executive branch. If you thought the second term was going to be a quiet ride, you haven't been paying attention to the news coming out of the White House over the last 24 hours. President Trump just made his first major personnel move, and it's a big one. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, well, she's out of that position, and Senator Markwayne Mullin is stepping into the breach. Now, common sense tells you that in a job as high stake as DHS, especially with the current immigration crackdown and the tensions at the border, you can't even hint of a distraction. Between the bipartisan heat Noem was taken on Capitol Hill and those reports about personal relationships within her department, the writing was on the wall. The president isn't interested in drama. He's interested in results. He's moving Noem over to a new role as a special envoy. But let's be real, this is about putting a fighter in charge of our security. Markwayne Mullin isn't just a senator from Oklahoma. He's a former MMA fighter. And a guy who has been incredibly vocal about his lack of faith in the federal bureaucracy, especially FEMA, when he says, if we have to wait on the federal government, we're going to be waiting forever. He's speaking the language of every first responder and every taxpayer who has ever dealt with red tape nightmare. The critics are already lining up, calling it a revolving door administration. But while the D.C. establishment is obsessed with who's who, the American people are looking for the who's going to get it done. We need someone at DHS who understands that the primary job of the government is to protect the citizens, not the bureaucracy. This isn't just a change of face. It's a clear signal that the status quo isn't going to cut it when the safety of the country is on the line. And the national security decisions aren't just happening in cabinet office. They're happening in orbit. The legacy media spent years telling you that the Space Force was a punchline. They called it a vanity project and mocked the uniform, the logo, and the very idea that space was a war-fighting domain. But this week, during the strikes in Iran, the narrative didn't just stumble. It hit a brick wall. The Pentagon has officially confirmed that Space Force and Space Command were the first movers in the engagement. While the critics were busy making jokes, our guardians were using a global sensor grid to disrupt and degrade Iran's ability to even see or communicate before the first kinetic strike was ever launched. We're talking about Golden Dome technology, heat sinking infrared beams and sensors that can detect a missile launch the second it leaves the ground. According to military reports, these space-based assets allowed our forces to track and destroy Iranian launchers before they could even get a second round off. Think about the common sense here. If this branch was as silly as the left claim, We wouldn't have just watched them effectively blind one of the most aggressive regimes in the world in under 24 hours. For years, the experts at CNN and MSNBC tried to create a Trump-sized joke out of our national security. But the actual results tell a different story. It turns out that when the chips are down and the missiles are in the air, even the skeptics have to admit what we've known all along. The branch they mock is the reason our sailors and pilots are coming home. And that right there is the story of the moment we're living in. Across the board tonight, you saw the same pattern play out again and again. When strength shows up, the narrative collapses. When the facts come out, the spin falls apart. And when the American people finally get a clear look behind the curtain, political class suddenly gets very uncomfortable. We watched the U.S. Navy torpedo strike remind hostile regimes that deterrence is still very real. We saw a congressional race implode as Tony Gonzalez suddenly withdrew, handing momentum to Brandon Herrera. We watched a political media darling stumble after voters pushed back against the hype. And in Washington, the House voted overwhelmingly to keep its own misconduct records hidden from the public while politicians lecture everyone else about transparency. Add to the fights over the constitutional carry, Rashida Tlaib's loyalty controversy, Trump's approval numbers outperforming past presidents at the same point in office, a massive media merger reshaping the news landscape, federal warnings about parental rights, a shakeup at DHS and Space Force proving its worth in the real conflict. We didn't get to go over Massie's war power fight that he lost, a taxpayer-funded child care expansion in New York, and you start to see the bigger picture. Different headlines, same underlying struggle over power, accountability, and who actually answers to the American people. Different stories, different headlines, but the same underlying problem. A political and media establishment that believes it should never have to answer to the people it claims to represent. That's exactly why shows like this exist. Because here at the Reaver of Common Sense and SHR Media, we're not here to polish the narrative. We're here to cut through it. We follow the facts, we connect the dots, and we give you the content the corporate media either ignores or hopes you never see. And if you want more of that, articles, analysis, interviews, and the stories that never seem to make the approved news cycle, make sure you head over to shrmedia.com. That's where the full coverage lives. Before we head out tonight, a couple quick reminders. You want more from SHR Media? BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon with BZ Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Beer and Bullstein with Lyle Armstrong, Fridays and Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Edge of Liberty with Sackhead Sean, Mondays and Wednesdays, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Mission Ready Men with Big E Jackson, Tuesdays and Thursdays, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And, of course, me, Reaver of Common Sense with Jersey Joe, Mondays and Fridays, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you enjoyed this show, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this stream. Every single click helps independent media grow and helps us punch through the algorithm that tries to bury voices like ours. If you want to support the show directly, you become a YouTube member by hitting the join button below the stream or drop a super chat during the live broadcast. Your support helps keep the light on here at SHR Media and keeps this microphone live. And don't forget to check out the SHR Media merch store at shrmedia.com, because sometimes the best way to spread common sense is to wear it. Thank you for spending part of your evening with us. I'm Jersey Joe. This has been the Reaver of Common Sense. And as always, where truth lives and the nonsense dies screaming. Good night, everybody.